Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Straight Science. Straight Science is an evening science seminar put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks, uh, Northwest Campus here, and this building, and the campus, and also University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant. That's me. And we're coming to you from Nome. Both Alaska Sea Grant and Northwest Campus, we are public servants of the Bering Strait region. We serve all peoples of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. And tonight we've been going kind of hard on the marine environment, so we're taking it on land. We have Bailey Murphy. A couple things about Bailey. Number one, she is the best dressed straight science presenter we have probably had. And she is a computational ecologist and postdoctoral researcher at the Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. And a lot of people know or have heard about Oak Ridge, and she is not involved in the nuclear activities that go on at Oak Ridge National Lab. So they're very much looking at atmospheric and climate type studies. So we're going to hear from one of the best tonight. And this is a talk on modeling and what they're learning about how their model is, whether it's accurate or not, and the work that they've been doing out by council. You've probably seen some of their experiments out there, and kind of telling us how it's going to be for the future. So we're all ears. And I might add that Bailey is giving us this presentation from Tennessee, where it is currently 10:35 at night. So she is one of our latest presenters. So on top of it all, we really, really welcome you, Bailey, and thank you so much for taking this much extra time after your busy day to talk to the Bering Strait region. So we're really, really grateful. With that, take it away. Tell us about the Tundra, your model, and our future.
All right. Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. Here we go. Okay, so as Gay said, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I work primarily on the NG Arctic project, or Next Generation Ecosystem Experiments in the Arctic. And today I'm going to be sharing some of my recent research based here in the Seward Peninsula, working on utilizing observational data from field sites like Council Road Site to improve land surface models and their ability to predict the future of ecosystems. Okay, so just kicking it off with why does Arctic carbon matter? Why do we care about carbon in the Arctic and what it's doing? Sort of the big picture here is that the Arctic is a really huge global carbon reservoir. Permafrost holds roughly twice the carbon that's currently in the atmosphere. And the Arctic is warming at a much faster rate than other ecosystems in the world. So around 2 to 4 times faster than the rest of the Earth. And in places like Alaska, these changes are visible, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. And this accelerated warming really significantly impacts global climate beyond the Arctic itself. Predictions about what looks like Arctic are really uncertain. And part of the factor is the addition of the Arctic in models. A quick pitch, what are land surface models and what can they do? So land surface models are a tool that we use to simulate how energy, water, and carbon move between the land and the atmosphere. We run them at scales ranging from point simulations at a single field site to the entire planet. And these models are really a distillation of our collective scientific understanding of our system and the processes that govern our system. And so they include mathematical representations of things like soil thermodynamics, hydrology, permafrost, plant growth, decomposition, greenhouse gas fluxes, a whole lot of things. And we use them for a lot of different things, but one of the primary kind of motivating factors is that they let us sort of ask what if questions about the future without having to wait decades to find out what's going to happen. There's sort of a sandbox, if you will. So they're a way to run experiments on ecosystems at scales and time scales that are not always possible to study in the field alone. The catch here is that these models are only as good as what goes into them. And so if we have processes that are poorly or we have parameters that aren't well represented, our models aren't going to match reality very well. And one of the issues here in the Arctic in particular is that Arctic ecosystems have historically been pretty poorly represented in models. And that's largely due to historical limitations of data availability to actually parameterize and calibrate these kinds of models. And so one of the problems that we see with land surface models in the Arctic is that they take kind of this one size fits all approach to tundra vegetation. And in the talk today, I'm really going to focus on vegetation specifically. I'm not going to get into permafrost and other elements like that so much. So from the vegetation perspective, most models represent kind of 2 to 3 generic Arctic vegetation types, or plant functional types, PFTs. Um, these are often parameters with temperate ecosystems if the data isn't available in the Arctic. And if you're looking at this and thinking, oh, there's way more than 2 to 3 important types of vegetation in the Arctic, good point. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the Arctic is a really complex region. Complex landscapes, polygonal tundra, you have mosaics of wet and dry, distinct hydrological and biogeochemical regimes in areas like the Seward Peninsula. You can have really heterogeneous patchworks of mosses, shrubs, lichens, grasses, all that have very different impacts on carbon, albedo, hydrology, and at things like boreal transitions, we can see really dynamic changes in vegetation and driven by disturbance regimes. And so what happens when we have this sort of simplification of these dynamic ecosystems is we sacrifice in a few ways. So if we're simplifying how we represent vegetation in these systems, we might lose out on capturing opposing carbon fluxes of, say, wet sedge patches versus dry uplands, which are interacting with decomposing carbon really differently. We might lose out on differences in productivity and functionality of tall, really productive shrubs like alder and willow, which behave differently than a lot of other tundra vegetation. And we might not grasp the full picture of how community distributions are shifting in response to climate change moving into the future. And these are just a few kind of big picture examples, but there are many other consequences. And so our kind of all this comes together to have the consequence that model predictions of Arctic carbon balance are highly uncertain. And when I say highly uncertain, we're talking big numbers. So some of these models disagree with each other by tens to hundreds of petagrams of carbon. And so the figure here just shows the spread in carbon storage. And I really drive this home because I feel like there's a bunch of different units and it's hard to visualize them sometimes. 1 petagram is a billion metric tons. So to sort of think about this, you can think about a train of railroad cars that are full of coal, and maybe each car holds like 100 tons of coal. And if one train car is about 60 feet long, and a train hauling just 1 petagram of carbon would have to be 156,500 miles long. So these are big numbers and really big in what the models are predicting. And so one of the things that the Energy Arctic Project has been working on to try and address this issue is developing Arctic-specific plant functional types. So can we make more representative plant functional types for the Arctic and put those into models? And is that going to help us capture and reduce some of that uncertainty and spread and what the future might look like in these areas? And so NGRX's previous work on Seward Peninsula at the Cougar Rock Hill Slope developed 9 tundra-specific plant functional types that were grounded in local observations. And these were representing these specific communities, and they had sort of tweaks compared to the pre-existing tundra or Arctic vegetation in the model. So some of the things that were changed were things like enhanced below ground biomass allocation, things like allowing the plants to have persistent fine roots over the winter and rhizomes for non-woody plants, improved representation of variability in biomass production, so tweaking allocation, carbon allocation adjustments, and allowing for variable soil depth and bedrock. And so what these PFTs really capture is the distinct physiological, structural, and functional traits of Arctic communities, ranging from wet sedge meadows to upland shrub tundra. And so this is great. This is an awesome step forward. But a model developed at one site, PFTs that are developed at one site need to be tested more broadly. We need to figure out, do these make things better at this one site, or do they actually work across the landscape, new locations, and are we going to see the same improvements that we saw at the site where they were developed, basically? And so the next step here was putting the model to the test. So thanks to partnerships with the Council Native Corporation, NGRTIC has collected a huge amount of data sets at the Council Intensive Field Site over the years. And these are pretty wide-ranging data sets. And to have the co-location of multiple really high-quality data sets like these in one area made the Council Field Site the perfect location to test and evaluate the model. And so what we did was we focused in on modeling a domain within Council that was about 6.4 by 3.3 kilometers, kind of a landscape scale, little rectangle dropped at the Council site. We ran spatially explicit model simulations at super high resolution, so 100 by 100 meter resolution, which is much higher than we typically run these models. In other projects, like a resolution might be half a degree, which is like 50 kilometers. So 100 meter resolution is pretty solid. And when I say spatially explicit, what I mean is that instead of running the model once to represent the whole Council area, we essentially blanketed the entire area in model simulations. So for every 100 by 100 meter square area within the domain, we ran the model. And this resulted in over 2,000 model simulations in this one area. So the motivation for conducting spatially explicit simulations at such a high resolution is that it really allowed us to explore the connections between heterogeneity. So it let us go on just does adding more vegetation types to the model make things better, and really investigate whether organizing the fractional cover of those types match the reality at the scale, improves carbon dynamics when we zoom out to the scale. And so this is some of the data that we were able to use from Council for evaluation. And so one of the really great data sets that were available here was the eddy covariance flux tower data. And so these flux towers are kind of the gold standard for carbon, for measurements of carbon exchange between the atmosphere and the land surface. And these provide really continuous measurements. So they're measuring every 10 hertz and then averaging every minutes constantly. And so these provide continuous measurements of ecosystem scale carbon exchange, and they're really reliable. Another tool or data set that we had from Council was flux chamber data. And so these are smaller soil chambers that are placed throughout the landscape. And so they're kind of point scale measurements. And And these offer really fine scale measurements of carbon exchange within specific vegetation communities. Other tools or other data sets that were available at Council were airborne and UAS, so drone hyperspectral remote sensing. And so these provided spatially explicit maps of biomass and productivity across the landscape. And the drone-based data set in particular, super high resolution. So I think it's like 2.5 centimeters or something, like it's very detailed. And so collectively, we were able to pull together all of these different data sets and have a really robust data to evaluate against the model. And this is important because each single data type tells us something different, and each single data type has its own limitations, has its own biases. But when we pull them together, they can constrain the model in a way that no single measurement can. And so this is where the years of field work from the NGR team really paid off. This is typically not possible. I've done a lot of model evaluation, and I've never gotten this lucky with the richness of data sets to do this kind of evaluation. But there were some challenges. So combining data sets that all exist at different spatial and temporal scales is a non-trivial challenge. And so you really need like bridging data sets. So things like we have solution maps of vegetation community coverage that were produced by the NGR team. And that allowed us to sort of use a paint by numbers approach for combining some of the data sets, utilizing techniques like flux footprint modeling to see, okay, this is what the tower is measuring, but what specific vegetation community is it measuring each flux from? As well as just frequent conversations between myself and others on the modeling side with the actual collected the data to better understand the landscape and what they learned from it. So how did we do? So after evaluating all of these model simulations with all of this observational data from Council, we found that simulations with the new Arctic PFTs explained 60 to 70% of the spatial variability in carbon fluxes and biomass, compared to with the default model simulations with the default PFTs, we're only explaining 12 to 18% of that spatial variation. And so this is a dramatic improvement and really encouraging. So we found basically representing the true vegetation heterogeneity with these new Arctic PFTs also improved average landscape level fluxes. So when we're, instead of just looking at the spatial variability, if we average it across the landscape, is it also better? Yes. But, there's no perfect system. And so we did see that the model still overestimated above ground biomass for really productive alders. And so this highlights the need for refined allocation parameters for tall shrubs, which is key because, as many of us know, these tall shrubs are really expanding across the Alaskan tundra climate change. And so why does this matter here? Why does this matter in Nome and in Alaska? And so with this validated model, we can start to ask bigger questions. And it's sort of this trust test, right? And if we know we can have a level of trust in the model, we can explore bigger questions in deeper ways, and be able to have more faith in what we see. And so the changes that these models are trying to capture are already underway in Alaska. Things like shrub expansion, permafrost thaw, and shifting carbon balance are actively happening. And so the work that's being done here on the Seward Peninsula isn't just contributing to a general scientific understanding, it's helping build tools that we use in a lot of different ways. We can use these to continue asking scientific questions. We can use these models to inform decisions that policymakers might be struggling with, or land managers might be needing to rely on to understand. Overall, incorporating this realistic vegetation, realistic Arctic vegetation just strengthens predictions of these landscape scale dynamics, um, and helps support scaling beyond just this individual site. And so kind of looking forward, what's next here is improving tall shrub representation, expanding to more sites, and integration with fully dynamic vegetation models. So the kinds of models that can really simulate competition for resources in a way that's more complex than this model. Um, and this is much of this is already underway. So moving from Alaska to the broader Arctic, um, we're applying the model to additional sites across the Arctic right now. And so I've been running simulations with this version of Arctic specific PFTs at the Barrow Environmental Observatory in Alaska. We're also we're coupling this model with the Arctic PFTs to a refined subsurface biogeochemistry model so we can get a more accurate picture of what's going on below the surface. We're running additional simulations at the Tule Field Station in Alaska, looking at fire interactions there and tapping into the rich history of data that they've collected over the years. And then we're moving beyond Alaska as well. So we're running simulations at Trail Valley Creek in Canada. We're running simulations out of Visco Scientific Research Station in Sweden. And other members of the team are running large Antarctic scale simulations. So instead of doing single site simulations, running this entire domain you see in the outlines. We're continuing to expand. So the figure here shows the location of different model evaluation sites that we're working at for phase 4. And so it really kind of drives home the point that if we work in an area where we can make these model improvements and tap into these really rich data sets that have been collected over the years, that allows us to kind of bridge beyond just areas where we collected the data and be able to apply these models larger scales where we might not be able to measure in the same way that we can at some field sites. And that is all I have. Nice acknowledgement slide. Thank you at the Biological and Environmental Research Program, DOE's Office of Science. Thank you to the NG Arctic team and our partner Native corporations. And thank you all for listening.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bailey. At this point, before we take questions, the Straight Science crowd, this is the time we show the speaker some love in the chat box because it's never easy to be a public speaker and it's never easy to be a public speaker at 11 o'clock at night. So you've checked off both those boxes and we thank you very much. So show some love for our speaker because we thank you for the time that you gave us, especially the extra effort to be doing this in the middle of the night for you. So you can put questions in the chat or raise your hand. For a second there, I thought I saw a hand up, but that just might be someone trying to get you a clap. So that's all good. And we got Rick Toman back on. I don't know what happened, Rick. There was some audio glitches, nothing to do with you, Bailey, but I think we're having, if it's a solar storm or the astronauts are up heading to the moon, who knows? But we seem to be having a couple of techno glitches, including my own computer screen while you were even before. I have a question to start us off with. So I'm not a modeler and I don't know, but it looks like what you guys are doing is a vast improvement. You went from what the old model or these other groups are doing 12 to 18% kind of accuracy. Is that what I was understanding? And you're able to get 60% more detail, at least more 60+% more detail. So one, I guess, is what is the purpose of all of the modeling? Like it, and then my second question is there ever an end to it? And maybe there isn't. I don't know. But if you're getting really, really good and accurate, if the answer to, maybe the answer to number one will answer that, like there's a specific endpoint or a specific goal you're looking for, maybe a specific time period that will take us forward, all of us, so we can prepare. Um, and if it just stops at a certain point, are we stopping these kind of projects? I would I would guess not, but I'd love to hear what is the big overall objective for this modeling exercise effort. It's huge effort, huge. And
Yeah.
then it just keeps going into perpetuity, I would imagine, until we stop changing. I guess that's two questions.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. I think so. I think the goal of this is just one slice of the pie, right? This is
Yeah.
one dimension of some of the modeling work, and the point of this specifically right here, this little slice of the pie, is really can we represent the Arctic in a more realistic way? And if we represent the Arctic in a more realistic way, does that reduce the predictive uncertainty in these models across all kinds of different areas that they're functioning? And so it's sort of, can we build the best tool, test that tool, make sure that it's a trustworthy tool, and then with that tool, the opportunities are endless, right? You can explore all kinds of things. There are a ton of questions that you can then apply these models to. Because, like I said, they include all kinds of processes. Like they're not just simulating how vegetation is interacting with the atmosphere, they're simulating how vegetation is interacting with the atmosphere, but also how the roots of the vegetation are interacting with the soil and how that's feeding back to 100 other processes. And then one of the really cool things about this model specifically, it's ELM. It's the land surface component of a Earth system model. And so you can run it in a fully coupled system where you have, so you're turning on the sea ice model, you're turning on the ocean model, you're turning on the atmosphere model. And you can run in that fully coupled environment and really be able to explore things like feedbacks, like climate feedbacks to change that you can't do with a lot of models. Um, and so that's kind of one of the big advantages. You can explore all kinds of things with these models, and that's in it's sort of mind-boggling all the cool things that you can do. Like this isn't an Arctic example, but I prior to this postdoc, a lot of my work was in forests. I was really interested in nature-based climate solutions and can we manage our forests better to withstand climate change? And we, with a model similar to this, we could basically run all these sort of experiments to see how can we manage forests better in different ecosystems to be more resilient to climate change. And we were able to come up with actual like policy recommendations from that. So that's one example of the kind of tool that you can use these models for. I think in terms of the your development question and like does the development ever end? I'm not sure. I think one of the big challenges that we're facing right now is like beyond just including more and more processes and more detail in these models, you also have to reckon with computational constraints. And if you're including everything, eventually these models get so huge and expensive to run that it's not as nimble, it's not as viable. And so there's a lot of work that goes into things like how do we reduce the computational expense of models like these. And so that's like a whole other slice of the pie of model development. Um, yeah, does
So
that
could
answer
we
your question?
it does, and it answers it really well. And so you could take, I mean, I always think of a model, it's to make a prediction, right? You're trying to make a prediction. So, but it sounds like you're doing a lot more other things too with it. So that is helpful, especially for, would we use this locally, like we would call upon, or the agencies, the big agencies that you're working with, or they not for really is it accessible to regional peoples, or is it more of a big, big, big kind of question, you
You
know?
can run it, yeah, you can run it at site scale, you can run it regional scale, you can run it site like state of Alaska scale. You
All
could
right.
pull local data like downscaled climate data for Nome and use that to run the model. So it specifically has data from
Peek at our
Nome
future.
driving it. Yeah, you can run it with the eddy covariance flux tower that's at council. You could use the meteorological data that that tower collects to run the model too. So
Okay.
it has like actual local data running it. Like all those things are possible.
Wow. Thank you very much, Bailey. Very good explanation. Rick, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bailey. I have a question, and maybe you covered this and I missed it when my comms were spazzing out here. So the sites that you listed there in your the last or next to last slide there, so Council, Ukqiagvik, um, Trail Creek, and one in Sweden, Abisko. Those are all low elevation sites, I think. Um, and at least the North American ones are all pretty moist tundra areas. And I was wondering if kind of have this kind of detailed information for maybe drier, uh, less productive tundra. For the Seward Peninsula, I'm thinking of, the difference, say, between Council and, out the Teller Road, where the vegetation, it's colder environment, much higher wind stress. The vegetation is just lower. There's less biomass there. So I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah. So the sites that I mentioned were all ones that I've been running the model
Oh,
at
okay.
personally. But there are additional field sites. So we have 9. And I don't totally know the elevation of all of these, but there's a Samoylov Island in Siberia. There's Peak Tarik Herschel Island in Canada. The Alva Station in Norway. That's probably a higher elevation site. And we have done simulations at Teller also. There are some people in the team, not me personally, but other people are using the model.
Okay, great. Thanks.
That's a good question. So for that, your project, is it going further north with latitude as well? Or all those places you mentioned are probably not at the same latitude? And doesn't this NG project go further in Alaska to the north as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So we
Okay.
also are doing, so I'm running this same model and then a couple other varieties of it at the
Okay.
BEO in Utqiagvik
Okay.
in Alaska too.
So you were really talking just council.
Yeah, for this talk, I figured people might be more
Yeah.
interested in council, so I focused on that. But
Oh yeah, no, that's great. Just getting the scope of the whole project though. So it sounds big. I know it's big, but
yeah,
other people may not know the size of this. Uh, does it show that on your previous map? Kind of the Alaska, not just which we really appreciate you talking about council, honestly, but does it show also that sort of the Alaska wideness of your of this bigger project?
So this map here has phase 4 sites. So you have the Seward Peninsula
If you could
sites, and
put it
then
in presentation mode, it might make it bigger for people. Thank you. There you go.
yeah, so there's the Seward Peninsula sites, and then the
Okay.
BEO, and then each of these little colored shapes is the location of another. Um,
Okay, like the red boxes and the yellow box and okay,
yes,
diamonds. Okay, got it. That makes sense. All right.
And then also regional simulations. Nick runs on the team. Another postdoc is doing regional simulations across this whole area.
And it's pretty impressive. You're bringing the modeling accuracy or the resolution down from whatever you said, 50 kilometers down to 300 feet,
100
right?
meters, yeah.
100 meters by
We're
100
not doing
meters.
that everywhere.
Oh, okay. But we're doing it here in the Bering Strait region. So that's pretty awesome. And then are we going to see this continue in the future, you think, if you can,
Do you
this
work
effort?
specifically at council or?
Yeah.
I think so,
Or in
yeah.
the region, in our region here, or the larger project at large that goes all the way up to Utqiagvik.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, that's Utqiagvik is my main focus right now for
Okay.
another project. And yeah, I don't think we're leaving anytime soon.
Okay. Do you have any forecast for how many more years you're hoping to be so we can get you on another straight science and hear how it's even gotten better? Even got your model's gotten even better.
I mean, I'm just gonna keep going until they tell me to stop. So
Okay. That's the
yeah,
attitude there.
happy to
That's
show
good.
up again.
All right. All right. That's very good. Very good. All right. With that, any other questions, comments, concerns, kudos? All right. Quiet audience tonight. Um, let's see. With that, we should probably let Bailey eventually go to bed. But I'm going to say, Bailey, if you want to stay on, and maybe Bob, if you want to stay on for just one sec. So the straight science is going to be next week. Will be same bat time, same bat channel, Thursday, April 9th at 6:30 p.m. That's Nome time for Bailey. And there was a statewide survey done of the Aleutian, actually, probably not statewide. We were probably at the northern end of it for the Aleutian tern. That is a bird we have up here all the way down to the Aleutians and especially on the eastern Russian coast. So there's been a pretty big decline of the Aleutian tern, and we're going to hear overall how their survey went, but they're going to auger in on the Bering Strait portion as well. So that is next week. It's going to be on the Aleutian tern survey results from last summer, and we'll find out how the terns are doing. I don't know if we'll hear much about the eastern Russian side, but they'll try to tell us as best they can what's going on in our region and further south, as that's where the survey occurred. So that'll be April 9th at 9 on the 9th at 6:30 p.m. local time. With that, we thank you all for coming. Have a good night, and Bailey, if you could stay on, and Bob, and we'll see you next week. Have a good night, everybody.